This podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended to provide medical advice. It exists to entertain and to inform. Welcome, everyone. This is Poor Historians, a podcast misadventuring into the archives of medical history and beyond. This is the show where we dissect a medical history topic to learn a little something about how medicine got to be the way that it is today. I'm Dr. Max, and I'm joined here by my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Aaron.
What's up?
And our medical history intern extraordinaire, Alba.
That's me.
Wait, I wanted to say your name differently. So how about Alba?
That's good.
Okay, no?
I don't know why you said it.
I don't know.
Makes her sound like a verb.
Alba.
Yo, Alba.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm keeping you from passing by.
Yeah. You
I don't know.
shall not pass.
Yeah, like that. Like you're trying to get me.
Like it's an elvish
Alba,
word.
come on, go, Alba. Maybe I heard that too many times.
I didn't
up.
think we'd pull that much material from that little mispronunciation. That's okay. I'm impressed. Anywho, as I did not say his name, Dr. Mike has to sit this one out due to a schedule conflict. So it's also a really good thing that Aaron was the one scheduled to write and research this episode. We'll just be
I
grateful
was
for that.
Oh shoot. Okay, let me just give me a minute.
Just figure out something while I'm doing the rest of the introductory stuff. And before we get on the show, I'll take a brief moment to mention our Patreon page. If you enjoy what we do here and you'd like to join the PH Pod community we're building over there on Patreon, please do check us out at www.patreon.com/poorhistorianspodcast to support the show, get access to bonus content, get episodes and behind-the-scenes news early. Speaking of which, I have a little bit of behind-the-scenes news that I'll share with everyone, though the patrons have already heard it. But Dr. Max, that's me, is I'm going to be doing a fellowship, guys. Well, I guess you guys know that. But so for the listener, I'm going to be doing a fellowship, which is basically a year of intensive training to change my hat, my medicine hat. Right now, I am wearing an emergency medicine hat. And I was going to try to figure out what that hat is. I know it's probably a helmet, to be honest. So if there was a hat that represented emergency medicine, it should be protective in some way. So I'm going to be switching my medicine hat and specialty through the fellowship. I'm going to be doing some training in hospice and palliative medicine here shortly. But and I am super excited about it, of course. But it does mean that my free time, which I do devote a fair amount of it to our humble little show here, is going to be limited quite a bit more in the near future during that fellowship. And so I say that here just to let you know, general fans, that I'm super excited about this and it's awesome. And yes, we are definitely going to continue bringing the show at the same volume. That's the idea, at least. But to do so, we want to kind of streamline some things. And so that means we may be playing around with the show format a little bit. We don't try to make gigantic changes, but there may be some things like that and a little bit less on social media, which you've already maybe noticed I've had to ramp down a bit too as I'm preparing for all this. We're still here, but it just we got to make things a little bit less producery on my end, and so we're going to do some things like that just to explain some of that a little bit. And but speaking of which, that leads us to maybe our first experimental changes. Not just because Mike's not here tonight, but we wanted to think of a segment which requires a little bit less preparation on my end. Now, we were doing the Mike's Trivia segment, a lot of fun. We still have some questions left over on that, but I end up researching all those questions, and it's cool, but it's a pretty good chunk of time that adds into the show. So we wanted to try something else out that can be a little bit quick, a little bit less preparation for old Dr. Max here. And so on a suggestion of a friend of ours, we're going to try a new segment before we get to the main segment. And we're calling this segment the non-medical advice segment, because as you know from our disclaimer, we do not give out medical advice. Aaron tries to, but I have to stop him and take it out because he's just a nice, generous guy. However, since we want to be careful about that, we want to give non-medical advice. And just because we're qualified as physicians to do medical stuff, it means that we're probably way less qualified to do anything outside of medicine. And that's where you should get, your advice from. So I would like to introduce our our topic here. And the idea is that a listener can send us a question for non-medical advice, and we'll do our best to answer it. And right now, this is just a non-medical advice segment. We just haven't like workshopped a catchier name. So, there you go. But this, you send us a question, we'll put our medical expertise into action to try and answer the question as best as possible. And so the first entry of this segment comes from a fan of the show, Robin, who was present at our brainstorming event recently. The other thing, we met Alba for the first time in person. Well, not me. I knew Alba in person before, but Mike and Aaron met Alba for the first time in person as we all got together to hang out and have some beers. That was fun, wasn't it?
Lovely. Yeah, Neezy got to come along.
Yeah, we all met Neezy too. Ebenezer, her dog. So either way, this came out of that, and at least one or two beers in, Robin asked the question. You guys love the show. Like she said, love the show. It's like her favorite thing that's ever been produced on this earth. Is how I remember her saying it. Like she's discarded all other popular media just because of our show. But after that, she said, What would the Poor Historians podcast crew? What advice would they give me as far as selecting the color of paint for my bedroom? And I thought, you know what? That's a question we are definitely qualified to answer. So what do you guys think? Do you have a suggestion?
I would say just a bright, vibrant yellow, because it's not my bedroom. So
that's
solid advice.
I would say stand in the room and close your eyes and imagine that you're bathing in that color in that room.
Nice.
And then take note of your feelings as you rotate through the spectrum of colors in your mind, and then get some paint chips.
Can you do all of that in the aisle at the hardware store?
Yes.
And if you do they call the police on you?
No, they don't, because they can relate. They'll help you.
So bathe in the colors.
And then sleep with the colors, because that's what you're going to do. Is you're going to sleep with that color.
You're going to sleep in the color.
So put the paint swatches on yourself while you sleep.
Imagine that you're tasting the color. What does the color sound like? Maybe they would call the police.
Well, somebody's calling the police now. I think that, and I do know Robin, I do know Robin. So I think I'm going to cheat a little bit because I know some things about Robin. And what I want to tell you, Robin, is I want you to resist your millennial urges and put away the gray tone paint. Put it away. Let's go for something bold here, and consider like a reddish pink kind of walls, like reddish pink, kind of bright, kind of vibrant. And then once that paint dries, go ahead and get like a darker, let's say brown to black paint, and paint little like seeds on the wall, like watermelon seeds, like, just kind of speckle them around the wall a little bit and make it a fun watermelon room. I think that is something that nobody's going to expect. It's definitely going to up the resale value of your house. And I actually knew a person, this weirdo, who did this to their bedroom, and then I married them. So I, from personal experience, it brought all kinds of brightness to my life. So go ahead and try it. I think
sucker for the watermelon walls, huh?
Yeah. I remember walking into the room going, what is happening? So there you go. I think, Robin, you have plenty to work with. Get some paint swatches, or don't, just do the advice I gave, because it probably won't get you arrested. And you know what? Surprise your loved ones. Don't run it by anybody. Just go do it. I think that's great. So there you go. Please do, if you are a listener out there, and if you have a question burning that you would like to get our non-medical expert advice on from your favorite goofball medical history podcast team, you should send that message to us. Send it by email, social media message, or if you're a patron, drop it on the Patreon page, and we'll do our best to brighten your day with paint swatches. It doesn't have to be paint related. We'll take a stab at anything, as long as it's non-medical.
It's kind of what we do, isn't it? Take a stab at anything. All right. So, on the suggestion,
you said you didn't write anything.
Yeah. Well, I just came up with this while we were talking. So.
Okay.
Wow.
Impressive.
I'm impressed.
the resource.
No, I had a longtime listener and friend, Gretchen, suggest this sort of rabbit hole, which I went all the way down. And I got to ask for a little bit of leniency from the listeners because the medical ties might have to wait a minute. But this topic is in the Gilded Age, which we love. There's cocaine, which we love. There's crazy fads. There is medicine. We'll get there.
Would we say our official position is we love cocaine on the podcast? That seems a little problematic as physicians.
This is a known treatment for, it's a vasoconstrictor, it's an excellent treatment.
You're saying it's got historical context. We love the historical context.
Yes,
to be clear.
That's why. Yeah. And, again, just our hidden theme of the show is that time travel is only good if you can come back to the present. So, because you might agree, this is maybe not something you need to do. A lot of the information is also from a book, which we'll link in the show notes, which is called Pedestrianism: When Watching People Walk Was America's Favorite Spectator Sport. That's by Matthew Algeo. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, but yeah. See, you gave me that look. That is great. So
I just no. My look was like, don't start reading books for everything because that's gonna really.
Only this one is a very good book. I liked it, but you don't have to, right? There's a lot of information about this stuff. Okay. So in 1860, a colorful gentleman named Edward Payson Weston bet that Lincoln would lose the presidential race and lost. And his wager was that he would be able to walk from Boston to Washington in 10 days.
How far is that?
I don't know. It's a ways. Yeah, it's a ways.
Usually you're the one Googling stuff while we talk.
I don't know. Yeah, you guys. I don't know, but I'm talking, so you could Google Map it if you want. It's a long it's a long ways.
Well, I don't want to be rude while you're doing your essay and start Googling
no,
stuff.
You go ahead. So he knew he was going to lose, right? So he's like, okay, I'm going to pay off this wager. I made this bet. But this gentleman, he was a prior traveling salesman. He had a long history. He actually ran away with a traveling group of singers in about the 1840s, I believe, who sang a bunch of abolitionist protest songs, and he was the one who kind of helped their shows,
was he
traffic.
Pro-abolition or anti-abolition? Just
he
to
was
be clear,
a pro-abolition. He wanted to get rid of slavery. Yes, so this was like
got it.
Peter, Paul, and Mary in the 1850s, kind of. So
he's a good guy.
Yeah, no. He started off well. He also loved get-rich-quick schemes and salesmanship and such. So he took this bet. And he got a bunch of sponsors, and he called the newspapers, and he said, hey, I'm going to do this stunt. And he dressed himself up in a crazy costume, and he started walking from Boston to Washington. And he was a crazy sensation. And in the sort of our current parlance, 100% went viral, but that's not what happened then. So, he became extremely famous because he told all these people about this stunt, and started off walking, and all these people came out to see him in all these different towns that he went through in New England, and he had a rough time of it, and he actually missed the inauguration by about, I think, 10 hours. So he got to Washington too late.
That's not bad.
No, it's not too bad. So he walked from Boston to Washington in 10 and a half days or something like that.
He did Kickstarter before Kickstarter was a thing.
Right.
He basically he didn't bet. He crowdfunded a publicity stunt is what he did.
And company funded. He handed out leaflets and all sorts of stuff while he was kind of on the trail.
Wait, hold on. He started a marketing company, Aaron. He didn't do a bet. This is a marketing company. He became a marketing company.
Yeah, pretty much. He was a shameless self-promoter. And so this was great. He had a good experience. He went through a couple more get-rich-quick schemes and lost all his money again, and then found a rich guy and bet him $10,000 in actual dollars in the 1880s or so, and said, hey, how about I bet you I can walk from Portland, Maine to Chicago in 30 days. Yeah. So he said, I bet you I can do this. Same thing. He made 30 days to walk from Portland, Maine to Chicago, which is a long way.
How far is that?
All right. So Alba,
it's like 1,000 some miles. It's a long ways.
All right. I'm getting some ideas here. So if we want to hire an editor eventually on the show, we might need to do something like this. So Alba, since you were the last one to join the show. I think you have to do the walking. I think that's how it goes.
Yep.
And I need you
That's
to
the
pick
rule.
a couple destinations. So Chicago to where? Where are you walking to?
Evanston.
Evanston, yeah.
That's
Milwaukee?
There you go.
No, it's not far enough. They're not gonna.
Nobody's gonna pay for that.
Yeah. Well, look, make it in your interest.
Then I'll drown on the way, and we'll have to
No,
finish
go
it.
somewhere warm. Just go south, somewhere warm. I think listeners will fund that, right?
Yeah, yep, they will.
Okay,
I'm sure they
all
will.
right.
We'll give
I
you
mean,
some
I
leaflets.
do like to walk. I live in a walking city. I'll walk.
Okay, we'll give you some Poor Historians leaflets, and you can that's our new marketing campaign. I hope you have some good shoes. This guy have some good shoes?
This guy had, not only did he have good, he made special boots for this walk, and he had little tubes in the boots, and he would pour whiskey into his boots, which he said prevented chafing and swelling.
No, it wouldn't.
Dear listener, that is correct. There's not any medical evidence I'm aware of that pouring whiskey in your boots would.
That's wasting whiskey.
Yes,
I would
because then
think
you
it
got
would
to
make it worse.
drink the foot whiskey. I don't know. I mean, it is definitely a waste of whiskey.
You don't want a wet foot.
It's unconscionable. Yeah.
What a wet burning foot too. I mean,
Well, he had apparently there were tubes, so I don't know if I don't know, but still.
But why wouldn't you just use water? Okay, none of this makes sense. I'm starting to question this guy's sanity, to be honest with you.
Now is
Yeah,
when
he's successful. This guy, so he made it. He made it from Portland, Maine to Chicago in less than 30 days. So he won the $10,000, and like before, he promoted this all over the place and became incredibly famous because of it. All the papers were talking about this crazy feat. And they were saying also at the time, he essentially became more famous than General Grant, who had just won the war. So this is immediately sort of post-Civil War. But yeah, so he did all these sort of walking exhibitions in the 1870s and such, and sort of continued to self-promote this idea of walking incredibly long distances. And he would make these bets with rich folks to say, hey, I'm going to walk this far, and I bet you I can do it, and you can bet that I won't. And he continued to win. He went, so he had these first two, they were both outdoors. So the Boston to Washington walk, he got very cold. He sprained his ankle. There was weather to contend with. So he eventually decided that it would probably be better to do this indoors. So he started to do indoor track raised, like walking feats of endurance, right? And so and this also made it easier for people to come walk him or watch him. So he would say, okay, well, I'm going to try to walk 100 miles in less than 24 hours. And he bet, that was his next one. He said, I'll bet this, I forget who the other rich funder was. He said $2,500, I can walk 100 miles in less than 24 hours.
Wait, how fast is he? All right, hold on. Let's get some
Yeah,
pencil and
'cause,
paper
I mean-
here.
He's not super fast. So this is the thing. There are descriptions of his gait.
But that's a lot.
It is a lot. Yeah, his gait is not, but he wasn't abnormally rapid. He just was able to do this for a long, long period of time. And he continually sort of started increasing these bets, and he increased the feats, and he continued to self-promote. And eventually he said, okay, I bet I can walk 500 miles in 6 days. Now, why would he pick the 6 days? Because Sunday, so you can't walk on a Sunday.
Okay, so this guy is walking in a big oval inside. So there's like a crowd watching one guy walk around in circles. Is this like NASCAR? He's making left turns
Over
only?
so people just popping in and they're like, cool. Yep, he's still walking. All right.
How
going
bored
home.
was your average person in this day and time? This is...
Right.
I kind of get the feed of it, the distance, but my gosh, this is...
Because after like a 10-mile day or something of walking around the city, I am tired. I cannot imagine.
But would you go watch somebody be
30
tired
No.
walking?
No. And
It's boredom squared.
100 miles in a 24 hour,
I don't know if that math checks out.
yeah, me neither. I'm like, how fast?
Imagine the 6 days though. So this 6 day race kind of became the standard. I mean, he set this, I can walk 500 miles in 6 days. Now, I will say, it sounds like they sold the most tickets on the 6th day, but people would drop in and watch him walk at all times. Sometimes he would sleep.
Does he sleepwalk? Are you going to tell us he
I hope he was
sleepwalks?
eating,
Yeah, we'll get to both of those things. So why would this work? So there weren't hardly any other spectator sports at the time.
Like, no kidding.
Boxing was around, but it was it was too violent to be popular. So when you think about the way America sort of developed, I mean, we were still observing the Sabbath for these events. So like it was kind of more a much more conservative country at the time, so that, you know, blood sport wasn't considered something that people could watch.
Have you ever tried to watch that movie now?
Bloodsport?
Yeah.
No, that's a
It
great
still holds
movie.
up.
Yeah, it does
It's-
still hold up. It's Jean-Claude's best work.
You were talking figuratively,
Oh.
but that was the first thing
Yeah.
I thought of.
Yeah,
We should all
yeah.
watch Bloodsport as a podcast.
I'm in. I'll watch it.
It's medical. It's blood. That's a
Baseball hadn't. It was just starting, but it really wasn't popularized. There really weren't a lot of other things to go watch. And in addition, we were a walking nation at the time. So if you're rich enough to have a horse and carriage, great. But otherwise, most people got around the country by walking. So they would walk extraordinarily long distances between different cities and towns in the country all the time. And this was kind of how a lot of people got around. So there was a lot of broad appeal. Like, he's one of us. Look at, he's just doing this thing that we all do. So there was a lot of appealing to his sort of his shtick, I guess you would say.
I can see that. You know, Mike's not here, so I can also say without him audibly rolling his eyes, this was also before professional wrestling, because that really kind of became a thing in the late 19th century. And so people had to do something to get to that cultural milestone. I understand. I guess all right, I can watch a guy walk around.
Late 19th century, put a pin in that. You can say when it started. I mean, we'll talk about how this craze is not still a thing in a little bit here after we get through it. But at the time, tremendously famous, like, again, more famous than General Grant, which most of us would all know. And for a long time, he was sort of unopposed. It was just like him walking. Can this one guy walk that far?
Nobody would want to do this, Aaron. Nobody wants to do this but him.
Yeah.
Except,
They're like, I got to walk every day anyway.
Except his main challenger. So around the late, I think it's the 1880s or so, there was a man named Dan O'Leary, who was an Irish immigrant, kind of down on his luck, trying to figure out what to do. And he overheard a bunch of people in New York talking about Weston. And the story is he got in a big argument with these people about whether an Irishman could also walk as far as Weston. And they said, no, the Irish are weak. You're constitutionally unfit.
Oh, come on.
To be
No.
anything
Ouch.
better than what you are. And Dan got very mad and he said, I'm going to prove you wrong. And he rented out, I don't know how he did this, but he probably the same thing. He rented out a large agricultural hall and had them build a track and said, okay, guess what? I'm going to do this 24-hour, 100-mile initial race, essentially. So the first time he did it, he survived, 24 hours, did about 100 miles, basically on brandy and water was what they said he drank at the time.
I mean, fair.
And then he actually challenged Weston at one point. He said, hey, let's have a race off or a walk off. I bet I can beat you. And Weston said, why don't you do something that is actually noteworthy and then I'll talk to you. So he beat Weston's 500-mile record. So both of these men, and Dan O'Leary set the new record of 500 miles in 5 days and 21 hours. So that was kind of the throw down the gauntlet. I'm going to show you that Irishmen can also do this.
I was going to say, coming from a part of my family is very, very much Irish in descent, and I can definitely see them doing something like this, especially certain members, to spite somebody else after a night of drinking.
Yeah.
You want to cast aspersions? I'll go walk. I'll walk as far as you want me to walk. In fact, I'm going to walk better than you can walk. I can see how this gets started. Yeah. There's no doubt.
So he used that. These two, Weston and O'Leary, essentially sort of kick-started a craze which took over the United States and England for almost 20 years. This was what at the time was called pedestrianism. And there were multiple events which people paid good money to go see for again, almost 20 years. Weston kind of said, I think I'm going to go over to England and I'm going to challenge them again, because he was a showman, challenge some of the best walkers in England to a race. So England at the time actually did have a long history of the same kind of weird craziness. So there's, as is typical, it goes back to earlier than ours, which is whatever. So in 1806, there was a famous, again, bet where a man named Robert Barclay Allardyce said, I can walk a mile an hour for 1,000 hours. And if I do that, you're going to give me 1,000 guineas, which is a lot. It's a lot of money. I didn't do the conversion.
Don't the guinea pigs, they will eventually breed though, right? Then it becomes a problem.
So then you get more guineas. More guineas. Yes.
Then you have a lot of them.
Okay. So, and that was a Scottish dude, right?
This is a Scottish guy. Yeah. Same thing.
Okay.
He's like, yeah, I can do this. And it also was related to a bet. But if you think about what that means, so he would a mile an hour for 1,000 hours. So he would walk the mile and then he would rest in between. And then the next hour started and he would walk the next hour. And he got through this, managed to actually complete this feat. And so there was this sort of tradition. Everyone's like, okay, this was tradition of what's called pedestrianism in England, but it was kind of, there were some other feats of endurance and then it was kind of waning. And then Weston came over and said, I can walk better than you. And the Brits said, no, you can't. And so there was this sort of, all this pride again started.
This is the most polite competition ever.
Yeah.
There's no combat.
I can walk farther than you.
Just walking. Just, it's a bold move to start off our medical history show with a discussion of walking. I'm going to say, I know we're getting there, and I trust your storytelling abilities, but
I just got to say, I think it's power walking at least. If you're going to do, I just did the math, and it's 24 hours for 100 miles is 4 miles an hour, that's not a stroll, right?
No,
I guess it depends how long your legs are.
He would walk with sort of a riding crop. I don't think he hit himself with it, but he would like sing songs and he would like make a big show of it, and he had special outfits and all this sort of stuff, and he would just walk in circles and try to entertain the crowd.
Was he allowed to skip? Can you skip?
No, he's moving. Okay, so this is a very interesting question. The Americans strictly adhered to the heel-toe sort of standard, which is you have to have one foot on the ground at all times.
That is the definition between walking and running, isn't it?
Yep. And the British said, well, this is fine. You can go this is go as you please. So you can run if you want. The British said, it doesn't matter. You can just go as long as you want, which isn't quite fair. But if you go that long, so the British did not actually fare well against the good Mr. Weston initially.
Well, it's because, Aaron, they were doing that ridiculous Monty Python walk.
Fair.
It took them way too long, burned way too much energy, and you're not gonna outpace a guy who's skipping and twirling a baton when he's walking.
Yeah, no, that's true. He initially challenged William Perkins, who had become famous for walking 8 miles in an hour, but that's only for an hour. So I don't know how he got famous. He did.
Well, he had those shorts that they wear in the Olympics. So it was like really high cut, and he had the hip wag that the power walkers in the Olympics too. Speed walking is a thing.
8 miles in an hour is a ways, but this just emphasizes there was literally nothing else to watch. Anyway, so he's going to come over here and he does all these exhibitions, and he pretty handily takes care of Mr. Perkins, who dropped out after only about 65 miles in 24 hours, and it was not even a good try. So everyone's like, oh man, this is amazing. And initially they thought that there's no chance this could be true, that he's walking this far. There's a Dr. William Peavy, who was a well-known physiologist at Guy's Hospital in London. That's what that was called. And he actually did quite a bit of work about diabetic ketoacidosis and some other sort of bread and butter medicine topics.
Boring. Let's talk about walking.
Okay. So yeah, but he said, okay, well, if you're going to do this, I'm going to see what happens to you, because I think this is kind of crazy that you would sort of do this. Yeah. I mean, because, these guys, he's like, how are you not sort of falling apart? I don't understand how.
So he wants to understand the physiology of it, like how their bodies are working, what kind of stresses they're putting on. Okay. I can see where we're getting there. I can see how we're getting there.
What are the effects? What are the effects on the muscles, especially because this is long exertion? And again, like this is the late 1800s. Weston, for one of his races, they described his outfit. He has a riding crop, of course, because he always has that. He has a wool shirt, his black knickerbockers, which are like knee-length pants. He has leather leggings, and then just thick-soled boots, and that's it. And then he walked in that for a week, which is gross.
And he put whiskey in there.
Yep. No, the whiskey was only the one outdoor. He's done with the
Oh,
whiskey.
my bad. My
Yeah,
bad.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
No more
no.
whiskey. Okay.
Look, I'm still sure all that smelled amazing when he was done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that leather breathes really nicely.
Very
I did have a
amazing.
pair of leather pants once in my life. I had no hope of squeezing into them nowadays, but I'll tell you, not what I'd want to walk in.
For 24 hours straight.
Heavy.
So
Oof.
PV was at the first. Why don't I can barely say race, but the first competition, I guess, between Weston and Perkins, this pretender, who did the 8 miles. That's nothing. So PV had a hard time. He ate a bunch of mutton chops and ale to try to
Wait, off people's faces? He ate mutton chops off their faces? Gross.
No, just in general. That was what he threw those up. He got a bunch of blisters. He stopped. Perkins, yeah, he had a really hard time. So he had a faint and irregular pulse. He was said to have a fever of 100.6 degrees when he and then he retired due to quote unquote nervous exhaustion. And this was all published in the Lancet. So it's like, what happened?
Probably had. I'm guessing he might have been developing rhabdomyolysis, maybe. It's a condition where essentially you can get it through extreme physical exertion. I mean, a lot of times it's weightlifting. What happens is rhabdomyolysis. Rhabdo refers to muscle, or I'm sorry, rhabdo is muscle, myo is muscle, lysis is break apart. And so you do this exertion, like you'll see a lot of times it's somebody who's not conditioned to do this sort of extreme exercise. Not always. Some people will you can get it from doing some extreme workouts like, prolonged crossfitting and that sort of thing. But basically all your muscle as you walk or you do any other form of exercise is taking little micro damage, you keep testing it, you keep straining it and putting it under load. And as the muscle cells tear apart, they release the substance called myoglobin into your bloodstream. And the myoglobin, your muscle cells, over time, they die and they regenerate and you make new ones, etc. So you always have a little myoglobin, but you do something really physically exertional, you get a lot of myoglobin at once. And myoglobin happens to be toxic to kidneys. And so I can imagine these guys who are doing these crazy long, we're not running, we're not doing lots of weightlifting, but this is still a lot of exertion. And the hydration standards of the time, they hadn't even discovered water until like the mid 19th or mid 20th century. So like nobody drank water. All these people are drinking booze, like and everything like that. So you're dehydrated, puts you at bigger risk for rhabdomyolysis. And I can wonder, when they have these small fevers, which you definitely will see with that, and weak pulses, etc. It's the other fun part of it is when it does start doing damage to the kidneys, you see Coca-Cola colored urine, which is like all that myoglobin and whatnot, just discoloring the urine. So this sounds like a really good time for the walkers. I take a 3-mile walk usually about every day, but I feel like that's enough. That's enough for me, Aaron.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So Perkins had a hard time, but he had a whole mutton chop and a bunch of beer. So it didn't go well. Weston, so PV noted his specific diet. So he had mostly some sort of fortified liquid. So he ate a bunch of beef. It said beef tea, but really that's like bouillon cubes. So it's probably beef broth.
Like broth, yeah.
A bunch of egg yolks, bunch of jelly, bunch of coffee, bunch of tea, a bunch of sugar. And then it was very common for many of these pedestrians to drink quite a bit of champagne. It was always champagne. It wasn't like wine. It was champagne. Okay. That was, I think, felt to be sort of curative. O'Leary specifically would drink whole bottles of champagne.
I bet he did.
Yeah.
I might go watch this now. I might be back on board.
Drink a whole bottle of champagne.
Right. I have done something like this once. I'll tell you. My wife and I took a trip to Germany to visit my mother-in-law when she had lived out that way. And they have a thing called a wine walk out there, which is where it was a 5-kilometer walk through the vineyards of Western Germany. And then you would stop at little stations and get a little glass of wine the whole way. And we did that all day. And it was 5 kilometers. And I have no idea how much wine, but I will tell you, it was one of the most fun walks of my life until the next day. The champagne's a bold choice because I had a bad enough headache after that.
It was popular. But, I think as far as what you're saying about rhabdo, the one sort of bit of data we can sort of look at as as modern doctors is he only made Weston in that was a 24-hour race. He only made 113 cc's of urine in the whole 24 hours, which is 100% what's
13
called
cc's.
113.
113. Okay.
But still, I mean, he's very what's called oliguric, so he's not making very much urine. Especially, you should make quite a bit more than that. And yeah, so he's way low.
He did not break the seal, as they say.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's a tiny amount. So certainly this sort of diet of fortified liquids probably wasn't enough to protect his kidneys. It's just who knows why he managed to tolerate it better. This was also around the time that the first sort of legitimate, true Victorian doping scandal occurred.
Ooh.
And there was a back and forth set of letters between the Lancet, which is the one prestigious medical journal in Britain, and the British Medical Journal, which is sort of a rival publication. And there was a medical student who also was there, which is, I think it's crazy that a medical student would get a letter into the British Medical Journal, but it's the 1800s, so who cares? And he said, hey, I was watching Weston, and it sure looked like he had some dark stuff that he was chewing on, and he had some dark spittle, and he had some leaves that he ate. And based on that, which is very thin evidence, he basically said, well, he's chewing on coca leaves.
Oh, from a distance, he's just like, yeah.
Yeah. He's like, oh, well, those are obviously coca leaves, which the clever reader that makes their own pharmaceutical grade cocaine may note that coca leaves are, of course, sort of the substrate that you make cocaine out of through a
I'm not
process.
aware that many of our listeners make their own cocaine.
Well, I don't know. Hopefully they don't.
Are you telling them to get it from elsewhere?
I maybe just stay away from all of it. But yeah, this was like a big deal. So we got this accusation in the British Medical Journal that, hey, Weston is essentially the reason he can do this is because he's doping on coca leaves, which wasn't illegal at the time. And in fact, there's kind of a whole split paradigm in the press at the time. Some people were like, Weston actually wrote a long rebuttal letter and sounded very much like a lot of athletes that we hear today who said, well, actually, I really only chewed the leaves my first walk in England and never after that. And really, I didn't think they worked very well. They actually made me kind of sleepy. And I initially took the leaves because my doctor told me to, but then I noticed they didn't help. So I didn't take them anymore. But yeah, I wasn't taking them when you said I was.
This is like the patient that tells you when you're like, did you do any drugs tonight? And they're like, no, but I was around people who did. And you're like, okay.
Great.
But
it just fell into your bloodstream.
But, interesting, when you look at the stuff he did, though, Weston, you mentioned earlier his diet, like the bullion cubes. It was unintentionally smart because he's going to get some fluid from that. The salt, actually, as he's sweating and sweating and sweating, will be somewhat replaced by that. So you want at least a little bit. I'm not sure that the concentration was all that physiologic, but there. He's got the egg yolks for the protein, right? Some jelly for that quick glucose. He's got the coffee, tea, and all that stuff. I can't really explain why the champagne would be, but the coffee and tea, you've got caffeine, and that's definitely a performance enhancement. In fact, this guy, you would have given him imagine giving this guy like 2 scoops of pre-workout and setting him on his way. He would have been amazed. Have you ever tried that stuff?
Pre-workout? Is it full of caffeine or?
Yeah, it's a caffeine bomb. Like when I was at one point training as a power lifter, I took some for the first time beforehand. I'm somebody who drinks a lot of coffee. Like, it's not that I'm caffeine naive. I remember taking it. I was just like buzzing at the weight bench. Yeah. And I was just like, this is yikes. But this guy was, he was doing this stuff. He was actually taking a reasonable array of supplements given the time without really knowing it,
Right. Yeah, we will come back to that. But yeah, so modern nutritional science for endurance sports probably endorse exactly what you just outlined, just sort of the pillars of, except his hydration is way low. So he has nowhere near enough hydration. But yeah, he wasn't doing too badly. It's better than a mutton chop and ale. I mean, certainly true in that regard.
Elba, would you do this event? Would you do this? If you were going to do the walk for charity, and by charity, I mean for our show, which of these are you taking on your walk?
Well, I'm a pescatarian, so not the mutton chops.
Okay.
The ale sounds
Good
really,
call.
I'm taking some ale
Okay,
for
fair.
sure, preferably a hazy IPA.
Okay, fair.
And, there's something about the coca leaves feels, to me, I'm like, is that really that bad? Like, I mean, it's a leaf. You're just chewing on a leaf. Like, don't people still do that in place of caffeine? I thought in
In some
some
places,
places
yeah.
of the world, in place of like a cup of coffee, that they chew on the
Yep,
coca leaves. So
absolutely.
I'm like,
We're gonna have trouble getting those for you. I got to be honest, but we'll find some. There's got to be some leaves in a garden somewhere that'll be fun to chew on. Oh, you could actually probably the closest thing would be tobacco because you're at least gonna get the nicotine from it, which is a little bit of a stimulant. So that might be the best I can do.
I was a smoker for 10 years. So yeah, beer and cigarettes. I'm fueling my walk on beer and cigarettes. Let's do it.
Yep,
All right.
definitely a stimulant.
Okay.
Yeah, so so this part here, this is a fascinating period in history. So some of these things aren't quite as medicine specific, but this went on for years and years, and there were these crazy sort of events. The color barrier was broken and the gender barrier was broken. So there was a woman named Ada Anderson who was born in London and then was back and forth, who also had a history in the circus, which I mentioned because I think the self-promotion aspect of it is very prominent in these. Like, you had to like get somebody to sponsor you, you had to get people to come see you. Like, these people were all characters, I think, in the best sense of the word. Like, hey,
Oh, yeah.
you want to come watch me walk? Is boring otherwise. So she said she did something different. She said, I will walk a quarter mile every 15 minutes. First, she did it for 1,000 minutes in a row. Then she did it for 2,700 minutes in a row. So a quarter mile every minute for 2,700 minutes, which is about 2 days straight. And in between, she would sleep at about 10 minutes at a time. That's I don't know exactly.
So she's like speed walking for 5 minutes.
Well, the quarter mile in 5 minutes that's fine. That's a pretty reasonable pace. So she would like go for about 4 or 5 minutes. She would sleep for 10 and then get up and do it
gotcha.
again. Right.
Wow. Okay.
And she did, like, she was very flamboyant and colorful. She had crazy costumes, and then she would make speeches to the crowd. I believe it's good for everyone to walk. This is good for your health. I believe women should do it too. It's kind of sort of an early, get fit type of movement, or like, maybe a fitness influencer would be the kind of thing that you would think of. Yeah. I mean, so there were a lot of sort of positives to it.
I was going to say, the other thing, it does dawn on me that you and I, Aaron, haven't walked for that long. But I think we've both done 36-hour shifts, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I can tell you at a trauma center,
yeah.
You don't necessarily get to sleep.
No,
so
certainly not for very long.
You're not walking
I've
continuously,
definitely been
though, in
awake
fairness. I think it's still pretty
I
impressive.
mean, that's a lot of walking.
I don't know. From one end of the hospital to the other, from the trauma bay to the ICU, was a good stretch. But that easily could have been a quarter mile, but not over and over again.
The whole time, yeah.
There were a whole group of what were called pedestrians. So female pedestrian isn't, I don't know. Yeah. they sort of equated this walking exhibition with the whole women's rights movement. So they basically said, oh, first you're walking, next you're going to vote.
How dare they?
How dare. Bertha von Hillern and Mary Marshall were sort of a famous set of women that would compete with each other, and they would do these 6-day races in Victorian petticoats, which had 4 to 5 layers, and still would meet sort of similar distances and would draw these giant crowds. I mean, it's just kind of a crazy phenomenon. There's a gentleman named Frank Hart. He's the one who broke the color barrier. He was actually, so Dan O'Leary, who we'll remember as the Irishman who was Weston's opponent, he eventually got, he kind of broke down a little bit. He had a terrible race where he essentially withdrew because of what was called, quote, excessive stimulation, but really the stimulation was the champagne. And so he just was too drunk to kind of continue. And it's kind of very painful, and he had a fall from grace.
I had that condition in college a few times, I'll be honest.
Yes, exactly. He went through sort of a rocky arc, and he became the coach for Frank Hart. So they would call Frank Black Dan because he was Dan's protege, which I'm going to just leave there as an example of something that was definitely Victorian and not that's what they called him.
Yeah.
But, it was sort of an interesting window. This is after the Civil War, but before Plessy v. Ferguson and Separate but Equal. So he actually wasn't barred from competing at the same place as everyone else until a little bit later. He set a record at the time, 565 miles in 6 days.
Jeez.
I know, and it's pretty crazy, right? I mean, this is crazy what these people did. Madison Square Garden it had a lot of events, but the first, and it's been torn down, I think, up to 3 times now. It's not the original, but they made Madison Square Garden for these pedestrian events. And there's a Vanderbilt that kind of redid it. And there was tons of people that would come in. Sometimes the events would draw up to 80,000 people over a week. There were balcony. It was just this crazy example of Victorian excess. You had arc lights and all these different things happening. You will hear also, when people go to this excess of endurance, Ada was able to kind of sleep 10 minutes at a time for 2 days. You have to, there's some baseline amount of sleep that you need, and you have to be sort of habituated to that. So there was one gentleman, Peter Van Ness, he tried to walk 2,000 half miles in 2,000 half hours, which I don't know. They loved the symmetry. It didn't go well for him. Yeah, he eventually went crazy. He had a trainer that was trying to get him to continue because there was a ton of money bet on all of these. So he went to his tent and got a gun and shot the trainer in the arm. Didn't kill him. Shot the rest of the gun into the arena. Didn't hit anybody. Collapsed. Then got up and finished the 2,000 hours. So yeah, this was
what?
Yes, this is all right. These crazy
you just shot
stories.
A man and then goes. It's just I'm just going. I'm back to walking.
Sorry, just had to get that worked out. Maybe that's how he falls asleep. I don't know. I don't want to judge. Maybe it's America. You fire a firearm into the sky and go to sleep.
They went for 6 days at a time. So vagrants would actually buy a single ticket to the event, and then they would sleep in the arena for a week.
That's using your noodle.
They were so popular that there were huge riots to try to get into the venues. Quite famously in New York, there's a giant riot to try to see one of these matches. So it was just a completely insane sort of thing, and ultimately died out for a variety of reasons. First off, it's so boring. It's somebody walking.
Only so much you can do with this medium.
Exactly. The 6-day race itself.
Imagine if because you know how WWE eventually got a hold of football and kind of did the XFL thing, which I think is still they're doing it again this year. But anyway, imagine if
extreme walking.
Yeah, extreme walking. What would that be like? There'd be coals and spikes.
Coals.
You'd have to walk through a pit of snakes or something too. I'm not saying I wouldn't watch that.
I mean, they did have multiple sort of 6-day races that had multiple participants. So they would have, not just 1v1, they would have up to 5 or 6 people at a time. There's a huge variety of things that they tried. They eventually said, well, bicycles are more fun because you might crash. So in the very late 1890s, they still did 6-day races, but on those, what you imagine of the Victorian bikes with the giant front wheel and the tiny rear wheel, they would do those same sort of thing. Penny farthings, yes. And then they invented a safety bicycle, which had 2 wheels of roughly equal size, which is what we think of today. They would do 6-day races with that. But really, what happened was baseball in the United States and musicals in the United States. So this is also the time when they started to come out with Pirates of Penzance and, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on who wrote those. I'm sorry, everybody.
William Shakespeare.
Gilbert and Sullivan. No. So Gilbert and Sullivan came out in the late 1800s, and they provided a different type of entertainment for a similar cost.
Well, no, actually, I got to stop you for a second, because everybody who complains that baseball is so boring, it was baseball or walking. So baseball is way more exciting than walking.
Yep.
It even has walks in it.
Yeah.
That is the milieu of the day. And in Britain, they passed a law that they could have their Saturday afternoon, so they started playing soccer, and that essentially killed pedestrianism. To shift gears, right? So they did.
You can talk about bicycles again?
No.
Well, I was hoping to work you into a pun there.
Actually, that's pretty good. That's good. Yeah, I missed it.
I'm going to say, though, you talked about walking for a while, and it was more interesting than I would have thought.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Now, there were a tremendous amount of attempts to try to use medical means to get people to tolerate these endurance sports better.
Ooh.
It was an absolute hotbed of what we think of as doping. So the coca leaves were only part of it. I mean, they ate and drank anything they wanted in these events. And the quote unquote trainers, which were called soigneurs for the bicycle racers, because France, they would try a bunch of different things to try to get these people to keep going. So the coca leaves, 100% people use that. Tobacco leaves, Max, you mentioned that already. Yes, they did that all the time. They would use, so these 6-day bike races, it got even worse in the late 1890s and early 1900s. They used a lot of nitroglycerin, which is kind of crazy. So nitroglycerin, we'll use that these days.
To stop the Roadrunner.
Exactly, yes.
It's a Looney Tunes joke.
Yeah, no, that was good.
Oh, but you
That
know
was
what Looney
good.
Tunes are, right?
Oh, I know what Looney Tunes.
Okay, that's right. Just checking.
No, I was having a moment. That was what you brought. You were saying that earlier, right? You brought up nitro earlier. Is it the same?
Mhm.
Am I thinking the same thing? Okay.
Yeah.
Nitroglycerin.
Oh, you mean so this is a callback to the Viagra episode, right?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So nitro
Yeah.
was discussed in that episode. Mike could have talked about pedestrianism in that episode, and he missed the opportunity.
He missed an
He
opportunity.
did enough research. I'm surprised he
Yeah.
didn't come across it.
Yeah. Well, this is late 1890s and bike racers, so 2 reasons why Mike might not look that closely. So it does.
And is that, sorry,
ahead.
just want to make sure I'm thinking of the right thing. Nitroglycerin, is that the thing that people would put under their tongue for if they have a heart condition
100%
these days?
yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. So it dilates the blood vessels.
Okay.
And in so doing, it sort of decreases the, we'll get into the weeds a little bit here, but sort of decreases the work your heart has to do to push against resistance. So it makes your breathing feel better. It worries me about the general health of the cyclists, because if you feel better after nitroglycerin, then you're probably in a bit of trouble. You're either stressing your heart to a tremendous degree, or you're stressing your lungs to a tremendous degree. All these halls. There was actually, the first attempt at a smoking ban in the 1880s was from Mr. Weston. He said, I don't feel good when I walk for a long time and everybody's smoking. Could you please not smoke? But that was a very sort of isolated incident. So people smoked all the time in these enclosed spaces. And then there were these people in the middle, like going in circles, like stressing themselves in an endurance sport.
Sure.
So it's like hot boxed in there. And,
yeah, right. So all these people were probably just kind of really struggling in that way. And there are, when you go to extreme lengths with endurance sports, you will put strain on the heart just directly. So they used a lot of nitroglycerin. They used strychnine. So strychnine is 100% a poison. This is another callback to one of our episodes. This was the one wasn't this the one in the pie?
Yeah, I think it was the blueberry pie. No, it wasn't blueberry. It was the other pie.
It was a different berry.
Wasn't
I was
rhubarb.
going to say rhubarb. It wasn't rhubarb.
It wasn't. It was
huckleberry.
It could have been, huckleberry pie,
Yeah.
right? This sort of terrible poison that makes you.
No, huckleberry pie is not a poison, to be clear to the listener. It was the strychnine that somebody was putting in the pie.
Somebody put strychnine in the pie.
Yeah.
So, when at toxic levels, it causes uncontrollable muscle contractions and seizures, and it's quite deadly. But in small amounts, they felt that it sort of hardened the muscles, which they thought was a good thing. It probably did increase sort of the excitability of the muscles to some extent. So they were trying to say, well, the muscles are not doing well. Let's make them work harder with this poison. I mean, not ideal. I wouldn't, it actually is, it's not great. But, that continued. That the winner of the 1904 Olympic marathon in St. Louis actually got 2 doses of strychnine on his way to his gold medal because his trainers were trying to help him. And yeah, I mean, so this sort of was part of this initial history of performance enhancing medicines.
If you finish a marathon despite being poisoned multiple times, I feel like that should actually move your time up. That should be like negative splits on your time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, the guy 100%.
Impressed.
Yeah, he earned the gold medal. It's a crazy race in general. There were 2 South Africans who broke the color barrier in the 1904 Olympics, who just showed up, who were there to see the World's Fair and said, I want to run the marathon. And those two gentlemen finished 12th and 9th in the marathon. One of them had to run a mile out of the way to avoid dogs that were chasing him on the route of the marathon.
How much were they poisoned?
They were not poisoned because they had no support staff. So they were fine. The Cuban entrant was a postman who had no gear and cut his pants at the knees so they looked like shorts, and didn't do very well because he ate some apples and fell asleep, which, that wasn't good for his time. No. There were no water stops whatsoever in the 1904 Olympic marathon.
They didn't have water.
I told you they didn't.
No hydration.
They didn't discover water until the mid 20th century.
Right. So that was kind of the early state of doping, which 100% came out of this sort of pedestrian era. Let's give these athletes anything we can to try to get them to do more with less, or to complete these feats of strength. And it wasn't entirely forbidden. The early press around this pedestrian era with coca leaves and so on, they're like, hey, this might actually be really good for you. It's like a stimulant. Maybe you should try some coca leaves. It might actually increase your ability to do X and Y. Which it would. I mean, if you chewed a coca leaf, I would be able to see more patients. I would be able to run farther. Caffeine, all these stimulants, they will help you do more.
But at what cost, Aaron?
Well, exactly. I'm not actually advocating strong stimulant use.
I don't know. I'm thinking about getting some coca leaves now.
I was going to say, Alba, you weren't on the show at the time, but like one of our earliest episodes was William Stewart Halstead. And he was the founder of like the residency program as we know it today. And he was very much addicted to cocaine. And yeah, I would work 48-hour shifts, no problem, if I had as much cocaine in my system as he did.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, at what cost is exactly the question. Subsequently, they sort of continued in this vein, and there are sort of two broad pathways. The 50s strength athletes, there was an American doctor named John Ziegler who, well, the story is he looked around and said, look, the Russian athletes are doing better than us. But I also wonder if you might have blamed the Russians, because the story is he conveniently got a Russian physician to admit that they were supplementing Olympic athletes with testosterone. And he sort of used that to invent anabolic steroids, which were first released in about 1958. And, the problem is that they do make people stronger because you can train more and you build more muscle mass. They do have a ton of side effects, but they became so sort of broadly used that, in about 1972, somebody wanted to do a study on what the effects of steroids were, and they couldn't do it in high performance athletes because they couldn't find enough people that weren't using it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that kind of, exploded in the 50s, and then it came to a head. If any of our listeners are my age, then they surely remember this, but a lot of others may not, that Ben Johnson was and the 1988 Seoul Olympics got busted for multiple ephedrine, which is a stimulant, and steroids, and like two other sort of compounds, and got in huge trouble. So there was a bit of concern about that on that side as far as strength building. The cyclists, from the people that took over from pedestrianism, just continued along the same exact sort of pathway. They continue to use strychnine frequently. It's still a banned substance.
I mean, they shouldn't eat it, to be fair.
Right. So, I mean, the Tour de France kind of accelerated this. That was started a lot like the pedestrianism to make money and sell magazines, is kind of the reason they started the Tour de France. But when it started, they had sort of a similar outlook. So, the Tour de France, I don't know if you guys watch it now. I mean, it's a very long bike race, but it doesn't have anything on what it used to be.
Ever since they got rid of all the performance enhancing drugs in the Tour de France, I stopped watching.
You've lost interest.
Yeah,
they used
none in it anymore.
To ride 405 kilometers at a time. So you would have to ride a bike for, which I guess we'll do a little bit of math for, that's still over 200 miles at a time through the night.
How many freedom units?
Exactly. Right. So they had, and these people, they just took tons and tons of drugs all the time. There was a journalist that followed along with some of the cyclists in 1924 and famously sort of cataloged a lot of these. And strychnine was super common. They would soak handkerchiefs in ether and
Hell yeah.
put it under their chins so that they didn't have so much pain in their legs. I'm sure that this was kind of sketchy because if you got too much ether, you would pass out. I mean, that was a well-known anesthetic at the time and you would potentially go unconscious. But if you could breathe just enough of it, you would maybe have less pain.
Sports sounded a lot more interesting back then.
Yeah, no, it was a lot. They drank a ton. You know, again, same thing with kind of the steroids. In the 1930s, there was a first rule book of the Tour de France that just said, just so you know, the teams will not be supplying drugs. But that was the only comment they sort of made about the about the drugs. Amphetamines were tremendously common. And then about the same time that there started to be some concerns in the 70s and 80s, there were a sort of a series of terrible incidents where people crashed. Roger Riviere crashed and he was full of opioids, and you can't ride a bike very well on opioids. A Danish rider collapsed in the Olympics and he had a bunch of amphetamines in his system. And so, yeah, I mean, this kind of just continued to worsen, which is sort of the history that led into these issues. So there was a sort of a big concern. 1967 as well. Tom Simpson was the leader of a British team, and he collapsed going up what's called Mount Ventoux, which Max talks a lot about wrestling. One of my favorite sort of watches is, the Tour de France and these long distance cycling races. So Mount Ventoux is 21 kilometers long, which again, 0.6 miles to a kilometer. So that's about 12, 13 miles. But in that space, you get 5,000 feet of elevation.
Oof.
So you go up that amount. The average is about a 7.4% gradient, which if you've ever driven in Colorado, that's probably sort of the steepest that it gets. But that's the average. So it goes up to way more than that for miles at a time. And this is still something that these people are not, they're not doing things that are sort of normal. It's similar to sort of these pedestrian things where they go like 500 miles in 6 days. I mean, it's just crazy things to try to put your body to. So it's Tom Simpson. He collapsed and died after this climb. And at autopsy, he was completely full of amphetamines. So they said, that's it. Now
it's bad.
It's not bad. It's not great. It's not great at all. They also at the time, however, also limited his water intake to less than they thought if you had too much water.
He's probably so thirsty, man. Ugh.
Oh God, I can't.
You made it worse.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's crazy. And the height of this is probably the Lance Armstrong era in the early 2000s or so, when he won 7 tours in a row. What's happened then since then is kind of this, because of these people that collapsed and had all these issues, they started to institute a testing paradigm and so on to try to catch people. But of course, this is getting into much more sort of popular culture and stuff and much more common.
Well, I think one thing, you have a note here, I think it's probably worth talking. It's interesting medically, some of the things that like Lance Armstrong and certainly many other cyclists and other athletes were doing. You want to talk a little bit about what one of the things that is kind of fascinating is the use of EPO.
Yeah. So Lance Armstrong, first off, I think the interesting part with Lance is his baseline. So you could put all three of us together as far as our maximal cardiac output, and we probably still wouldn't necessarily be at Lance's baseline. So it is true that like a lot of these guys, I mean, these men and women have just a tremendous capacity genetically to sort of output this high amount of power over time without stressing themselves as much as we do. But here's the thing, right? Endurance athletes they need to try to avoid over stressing themselves. And so they look for ways to try to increase the ability to carry oxygen. And EPO, or erythropoietin, is a medicine that we right now still use for kidney patients to try to stimulate red blood cell manufacture in the bone marrow, right?
It's a naturally occurring hormone that your kidneys make as well.
Right? This is a hormone that the reason it's low with kidney disease is because the kidneys are in trouble, so it doesn't produce enough, so you get anemic. Most kidney patients have low blood counts, and that's anemia, so they don't have enough hemoglobin or red blood cells to sort of carry the oxygen around their body. And that's because this hormone isn't produced by the kidneys, and that hormone is the one that stimulates the bone marrow to make the red blood cells. If you take it normally, you will still get more red blood cells than you would otherwise. So basically, Lance is like, I mean, I already got a good pump with my heart and I already am in very good shape, but how about if I add 5-10% to the amount of underlying red blood cells that I have to carry more oxygen around every time my heart pumps. And, those don't sound like huge numbers, but even 4, 5, 10% over 15 miles is going to make this sort of enormous difference.
Yeah. At that level,
in what
certainly.
he does. And Lance and Dr. Ferrari and the U.S. Postal Service team, I mean, this is pretty well documented that they had an extremely scientific and focused campaign to do a bunch of different things to sort of increase his performance. EPO was one of them. So they would take EPO injections. He would donate a pint of his own blood and then save it for a couple months at a time and then reinfuse the blood a couple months later during a race. So he would take the blood out. It's his own blood, so he's not going to have a reaction. And then he gives himself his own blood back in the middle of a race. So he all of a sudden has an extra pint of blood that does work for him.
I have to say, it seems weird to call that donating if you're just giving it to yourself.
Yeah, it's fair.
Investing it.
So he's setting aside some oxygen-rich blood for himself.
Right. And then your body notices that you're low, so your body responds and makes new blood. So your body will be able to replace, usually the average life cycle of red blood cells is around 90 days for mature blood. So he's going to replace that within about 3 months, and then he can save it and then give it back to himself. And all of a sudden he gets a boost and it's his own blood. So he's not going to have a reaction. And they would also routinely use testosterone to try to boost his sort of performance ability and his recovery. And human growth hormone was also used. I think he used that as well. I mean, it's just a very, very aggressive long-term regimen to try to increase his ability. And just we're looking at these small margins. He's already a great athlete, but these things make a huge difference. And the whole point of this game is to allow your muscles to work at a higher level for longer, because at peak exertion, these athletes going up this mountain, like this Mount Ventoux as an example, their muscles will get very, very acidic and then they don't work as well. So you will be able to measure the blood of a performance athlete after a maximal exertion over that period of time, over those, I don't know, how long does it take to climb Mount Ventoux? Maybe 30, 45 minutes for really good cyclists. I mean, they'll get the acidity of their blood will be equivalent to somebody who's in severe shock. They will build up
lactic
all this
acid is the byproduct of working all those muscles. So yeah, and it does acidify your blood.
So if you can try to control that somehow and reduce it, you're going to be less prone to getting tired. So it's shifted over the years from sort of bad ethics and bad science with strychnine and coca leaves and poor hydration to bad ethics and good science that worked. I mean, Lance Armstrong won 7 Tour de France races in pretty dominant fashion. And I got to say, if you guys, I mean, just to plug, I mean, this summer we have just incredible young cyclist athletes that are breaking a bunch of records again. And you sort of wonder, are they doing something different? But it also could absolutely be a combination. I mean, the science has gotten better and better. The new thing that they're talking about, well, not even that new, but so they've managed to give themselves bicarb in a special gel and all this sort of stuff. So the science is actually pretty cool.
Bicarb is basically takes away the acid is the idea, right?
Yep. So your body has sodium bicarbonate you have is a buffer for acid. So your body makes acid when it is hurting in one way or another, either exertion or shock. And if you can buffer that acid and then breathe it out more efficiently. Yeah. So, and if you are drinking bicarb, then you might get some benefit to that.
Sounds gross.
It is. So, I mean, it's crazy. Like the current recommendations now, I mean, as far as the egg yolks and the ale and the mutton chops, I mean, the current recommendations are like I think they backed away a little bit, and I'm not a sports scientist, but we're looking at like 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates an hour for these athletes. So that's like, a Cliff Bar, like I don't know, it's a lot of Cliff Bars an hour. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of just sugar and carbohydrates that you have to somehow take in. So the issue is, how do you not vomit and get diarrhea all over? A lot of the new products are just like, hey, it makes you less sick.
The major difference here is, though, like you're talking, these are pretty incredible athletes. There's no doubt about it. And that's why I look to more pure sports, and I look to professional wrestling, and I follow the adage of Hulk Hogan, who just said, listen to your parents, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins, and you'll get big and strong like he did. He never used any steroids or any of this stuff.
Never.
It's good advice from
a lot of vitamins. Lot of vitamins. There you go.
Yep.
Well, so I have to wonder, Alba, since you were captain of the Medical History Podcast badminton team, what, in your opinion, was the most interesting take-home from today's episode?
Don't overdo it. Because, don't overdo it. I lift weights, and that rhabdomyolysis,
Myolysis, yeah.
Yeah, that's sticking in my head. I don't lift weights that much, though. Not that heavy. I'm not that ambitious.
You have to try. It's usually like extreme repetition and extreme amounts of reps. So as long as you're staying away from that, you should probably be okay. Well,
I'm pretty chill.
With that, we appreciate everyone listening, and we'd love to hear from all of you out there. So if you'd like to check out our merchandise or provide feedback, we can be reached through our website, www.poorhistorianspod.com. There you can send us messages and find links to our social media sites. We do work to respond to posts on all of those accounts. If you're looking for a way to contribute to the show, get some bonus content, and be a special part of the House of Medical History, as we call it, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/poorhistorianspodcast. Free way to support us is to tell a friend about us, or go and leave one of those nice 5-star reviews on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever platform you choose. And lastly, if you're a gamer or just want to hang out with me, check me out on my Twitch channel via the link in the show notes. Until next time, Poor Historians are signing out. AMA. We just need a little something for the patrons. Does anybody have a fun little patron story?
I don't know if it's a fun patron story, but I have a question.
Sure.
All of the talk about like recommendations and things that were not ethical to use and now ethical to use. I have in my mind like, okay, I think the summary is, and I just want to know. So like a new workout technology supplement comes out, and the line of, is it ethical or not ethical? Is there anything bad for you about it? Right? Like it can do all kinds of crazy things that are good for you, and it's fine. But if once it starts being bad for you, then we're like, no, don't do that.
Well, I think that the ethics of it come in with like sport and competition, and I think the trouble is that there's sort of a fine line on a lot of these things.
Yeah, it seems really complicated.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a moving target as far as, why ban anabolic steroids and allow like creatine? You know what I mean? There are actually, I don't know if they allow creatine, to be honest with you, but I think it was, at least at one point, I know it was an accepted substance. So it's probably one of those things that is a moving target, and expert panels come together and sort of discuss, because what happens is, as Aaron's mentioning, you find these new things like bicarb or whatnot, and like, using that, so why are we allowing that? Or is it so new we have to like sit and think about it? And I think there's probably a sit and think about it and then decide whether it's too much of an advantage, making it, at least within the eyes of the commission that regulates these things, is it unethical? Like you have in powerlifting, for a sport I know quite a bit about, you have natural powerlifting, and then like we don't care what you take powerlifting, and
oh boy,
the we don't care what you take powerlifting is where you see a lot of like really crazy records broken, because a lot of those guys, I mean, they're absolutely annihilating their muscular structure as they lift heavier and heavier weights. And so taking anabolic steroids is a way to build up that reserve, to build the muscles bigger, etc. And in a sport like powerlifting, where you're just trying to see like what is humanly possible, they they at least have a very open federation. It's like, we don't care. Like, take whatever you want, get as big as you want, and like let's move some weight. But I'm guessing that it's just a committee that basically has to say, okay, well, this is a new technology in exercise physiology, so like, you now this is crossing the line, and so I think that's probably how it's made. Is that your understanding, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, so the World Anti-Doping Association is kind of the biggest governing body for these things, for the endurance sports, which I follow more than like the powerlifting sports. And it definitely, the cause harm part of it is a huge part. So that's why they have like amphetamines and strychnine on the list of banned substances. Like, this will hurt you, so you shouldn't take it.
Yeah, that's fair.
But then sodium bicarbonate, I mean, the thing is like, it's in your body already. The key is, how do you take it so you don't have diarrhea? Mm-hmm. And if you can just figure out some way to deliver that, then that's very different from something that could potentially harm you as a drug or a stimulant. But, I mean, so there's I going to the school I went to, there's sort of a prominent ethicist who basically said, this is all hogwash. I mean, why wouldn't you use technology like this? These are men and women that are already riding these crazy, bicycles that only weigh like 4 pounds. And so there's all these things they do with technology to try to make themselves better. Why do you stop that with some sort of supplement? So it has a lot to do with a level playing field. And then also the fact that you could never, I think, in my mind, you could never trust this sort of driven competitive athlete to be like, well, I'm not going to take this because it's not good for me. They're going to take it. I mean,
I think the harm to the athlete is something that probably,
that's the key.
I mean,
if you're in your 20s and you're like, I just want to be faster and I want to win, like, you're going to cross a lot of lines. So I think that's the harm to the athlete is the big thing. And there are a lot of harms to anabolic steroids and such, and they're not good for you. So I think that's the main thing, is that if it hurts you, then you shouldn't do it. And as to the level playing field, I mean, yes, that's the ethical problem with the supplements, but I mean, there's also so many other problems with access to facilities and all this other stuff that we sort of, that's probably part of having a fair competition as well. We don't really address that because it's too difficult.
Yeah, there's many factors.